University of Arizona, and her MS in Environmental Health Science, Global Health and Development from UC Berkeley. Please welcome Courtney Smith.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to have to apologize in advance for my shaky voice because I am suffering greatly from allergies, so bear with me. So this is the 5th CSERT Solar Conference, and it just gets more and more exciting to be working in solar in the clean energy space here in California. This last year, so since the last CSERT conference, this last year has seen a lot of rapid changes in our energy market. We've seen a new governor, and notably, we've received a new statewide charge. So in California, we are now officially charged with figuring out how the heck we're going to decarbonize the 5th largest economy in the world. So for those who may not be aware, last September, California enacted a bill that makes California the 2nd state in the nation with a deadline to move to zero carbon electricity. So specifically, this bill requires California to be 60% renewable by 2030, and it sets a goal for us to be 100% zero carbon by 2045. So basically, within the next 27 years, we're attempting to completely decarbonize our electricity sector. But that alone, in my opinion, that's not going to be the hard part. The hard part, the thing that's going to make this charge a really formidable one, is that we're striving to do it in a way that also creates good jobs, in a way that makes sure that pollution doesn't occur elsewhere, and that ensures that California continues to receive reliable, affordable electricity, even as we also have to meet the challenges and the impacts of climate change. Before I talk about renewable and solar energy policies in California, I want to spend a moment on talking about one of the really important reasons why we're doing this in the first place. This push to decarbonize the grid and develop a clean energy economy is actually a part of a much larger effort the state is making to address climate change, which threatens California's way of life. From our agricultural sector to tourism industries, to the real estate and lives located in wildfire-prone areas and located along the hundreds of miles of coastline we have here in California, we have so much to lose. Last November, I had the opportunity to tour Paradise, California, while it was still evacuated in the wake of the Camp Fire. It looked like a war zone, with block after block of homes completely destroyed. Having seen that for myself, I can say we've already lost so much. So addressing climate change in California is something that we have to do to protect our welfare. Fortunately, as most of you know, because you're a part of it, in California, we've already made significant progress towards a clean energy economy. In fact, we've done it at a rate that many thought was not possible. And nothing epitomizes this rapid growth more than solar. We've been working on renewable energy here in California for decades. Back in 2002, we enacted the Renewables Portfolio Standard, and that at the time was largely driven by a desire to diversify our electricity resources after the California electricity crisis in 2000-2001. Expanded over the years, the RPS now requires our utilities to procure 33% of their retail sales by 2020 and 60% by 2030, as I've already mentioned. So back when the program started, back in 2002, California only had 11% of its electricity delivered and served by renewables. We estimate that last year, 34% of the power that was used in California came from renewable energy. And solar in particular played a really big role. Last year, it became the #1 renewable resource in California. It makes up 36% of all of the renewables we have here. And that has been largely a result of California's mandate. We have now some of the biggest projects in the world. We have the world's largest thin film solar PV project right here in Riverside County, Desert Sunlight Solar. That, plus when you combine it with Solar Star in Kern and Topaz Solar Farm in San Luis Obispo, we have the 3 largest solar facilities in the United States. We also have the world's largest rooftop solar up in Cupertino at the Apple headquarters. But in addition to utility-scale renewables, we've also been really successful at advancing rooftop solar here in California. Last year, the total behind-the-meter capacity in the state was almost 8 gigawatts. And if we keep on going at the rate that we've seen, we expect that in 5 weeks, California will reach the milestone of having 1 million solar roofs in California. This is an incredibly momentous achievement, and it really speaks to the power of smart government intervention to create the world that we want to see. So I want to spend a little time on how we did it, because in California, we've actually applied a formula, a policy formula, to try and advance the technologies that we want to see. So first, we bring about technology development and adoption by providing money for research and development. Once the technology is ready, we support its adoption with incentives. And then, as the technology becomes cost competitive and markets begin to mature, we transition to requiring it. So, in the rooftop solar side, we started early by supporting R&D and a lot of the things that happen within CSIRT. Then, in 2006, the California Solar Initiative was established. This was a $2 billion 10-year commitment to creating the solar rooftop market here in California. The program accelerated rooftop solar industry by providing the support needed to create cost efficiencies, to raise consumer awareness and demand, and then largely to target the building industry, to teach them how to put a small power plant on top of a house. This program essentially created a glide path to the last state policy, which is where we have now transitioned to requiring it. So last December, the Energy Commission received approval to implement its proposed building standards. As part of these building standards, which will be effective in 2020, every new home in California will have PV on it. And these requirements demonstrate that solar is more than a solution to our state's environmental goals. It's also a solution to our housing affordability needs, because a home with solar costs less than a home without solar. The PV requirement actually makes homes more affordable, because when we've done the analysis, the reduction in electricity bills exceeds the concomitant increase in a mortgage by about $35 a month, meaning on day one, the occupants of those homes are going to be saving money. Importantly, the new building PV requirement recognizes some of the physical barriers to rooftop solar in all locations, and it's paved a way for community solar options to be utilized as well. I know there's a panel later speaking about that. The PV requirement is an important milestone, but we actually have further to go in California to build the buildings of California's future. As Steve alluded to, the next chapter in creating a clean energy system in California will be electrifying all homes in California. And in fact, these homes are already here. Less than an hour from here in Bellflower, all electric homes are already for sale. The Boulevard development by City Ventures is offering townhomes with all electric, solar powered, and pre-plumbed for EV charging in every home. And this is offered as standard, not to comply with any requirements, but because many consumers understand that bill savings come with all electric living. So in summary, the story of solar in California is a remarkable story of a technology that started as niche and extremely cost prohibitive to being one that is actually making California a more affordable place to live. But when it comes to taking action, it's not all being done at the state level. I think it's really important to mention that a lot of action and innovation is actually happening on the local and regional government level. In fact, we can't talk about solar in California without mentioning what has become a bit of a poster child, admittedly an unexpected city, Lancaster, California. It really embodies the idea that renewable energy is not only needed for our environmental future, it's a critical part of our economic future, and that it can and should be a bipartisan issue. The Republican mayor of Lancaster has actually been one of solar's biggest champions in that region. After being hit hard in the 2009 recession, Lancaster saw solar as a really important part of their economic rebirth. Now the mayor gets to boast that they have created over 1,000 jobs. And notably, they were the first city in the nation to require rooftop solar to be built on all new homes. So a move that the state followed. But remember, Lancaster was first. And local governments all across California are leading the way. One area in which that is very much the case is community solar. So while the California Public Utilities Commission has set up the Green Tariff Shared Renewables Program for investor-owned utilities to develop and deliver what many consider to be community solar programs, these programs have admittedly encountered barriers that have prevented them from being really successful models. Recognizing that those programs have come at a premium to many customers, the CPUC has actually announced somewhat recently 2 additional programs aimed at reaching low-income and disadvantaged communities. One of which aims to really bring the benefits of developing sources locally to those communities, such as job creation. However, both of those programs that the CPUC has developed relies on greenhouse gas emission revenues to essentially be able to provide it at a discount to disadvantaged communities. But that is where we're actually seeing local governments step in, and publicly owned utilities in particular. They're really serving as test beds and experimental areas for diverse community solar program models. LADWP, Imperial Irrigation District, communities big and small across California are really working to develop innovative ways in order to offer solar to customers who can't be served by traditional rooftop. And they're also challenged by having to consider some other really important factors and community values, such as the extent to which solar actually needs to be physically located in the community. And also trying to figure out how you do this and how you develop a model that actually makes it come at a cost that's cheaper than traditional rates. In fact, right nearby, the small city of Colton recently created a community solar program specifically made to benefit their low-income customers. So I'm actually really personally very excited to see what local providers, that's both publicly owned utilities as well as community choice aggregators, come up with as they continue to innovate in the community solar space and continue to advance our state's progress towards a clean energy future. As I've said, we've been wildly successful in developing renewables here in California. So successful that we're starting to hit a point where we might have too much of a good thing. We can no longer talk about barriers to solar in the state without talking about modernizing our grid and providing renewables integration services. The idea being that the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow exactly when we need electricity most. So we need to be able to advance strategies that help with that mismatch between supply and demand. An important one of these strategies obviously is energy storage, especially utility scale storage. And storage right now is in a really unique place. Stephen already drew some parallels between it and solar, but it's where solar was roughly 10, 15 years ago, where the price was high, but the cost curve was dropping and expecting to drop rapidly to a point to where it will pencil out. To help with this, California has established a whole host of different policies and programs aimed at reducing that cost curve faster. Most notably, through legislation, we have actually set a bunch of requirements for our investor-owned utilities to install over 1,800 megawatts of storage, 500 of which has to be behind the meter. While this is one of the most ambitious energy storage requirements in the world, it's not going to be enough. It's a far cry from the 4,200 or the 15,000 megawatts of ramping that we estimate that we need to have here in the state to satisfy peak load. This is why other strategies, from new and improved markets to demand response to time of use rates and other strategies we haven't even identified yet, are going to be critical to this. With energy storage, just as in the early days of solar, cost has been seen as the predominant barrier to widespread adoption. However, there have been a bunch of recent events here in California that I think are actually indicating that energy storage is providing a viable alternative to natural gas in the state, perhaps much faster than we expected. And the big one that I'll focus on is Aliso Canyon. So as you all likely remember, in 2015, a catastrophic rupture occurred in the Aliso Canyon natural gas reservoir located in Southern California. This event was the single worst natural gas leak in US history in terms of environmental impact. In response, Governor Brown issued a state of the emergency, and the reservoir was mostly shut down. The limited availability of the Aliso Canyon gas storage facility caused insufficient delivery of gas to power plants, and it led to a strained electricity market for the last few years here in Southern California. So Aliso Canyon, or I should say the lack of Aliso Canyon, has really kickstart utility scale storage in Southern California. We have seen several utilities look to storage to address their projected needs. For example, recently the CPUC fast-tracked approval of over 100 megawatts of battery-based energy storage within the SCE and San Diego Gas and Electric Service Territory. Among the Aliso Canyon energy storage replacement facilities now in place is Edison's 20 megawatt Mira Loma battery storage facility, which I mentioned only because Tesla was able to deploy it in less than 3 months. So I think raising utility scale storage at a solar conference is really important because not only does one technology need the other, but storage actually offers economic development opportunities that large-scale solar facility development also offers California communities. Now, on the smaller scale, on the distributed energy storage side, the state continues to invest heavily in research and development. And these early demonstrations of solar plus storage and microgrid technologies are, I think, some of the most exciting because they actually provide a little bit of a limited preview into what the grid of the future can look like. One that's cleaner and more resilient and more affordable in the face of climate change impacts. Take, for example, the city of Borrego Springs. It's located about 90 miles east of San Diego, and it's a really small town of about 3,400 people. It abuts the Anzo Borrego Desert, so it has summertime temperatures that are often climbing over 100 degrees. So the city is somewhat remote, and it lies at the end of a San Diego gas and electric transmission line. As a result, it was suffering from frequent power outages. These outages were of particular concern because the community is home to many senior citizens who are vulnerable to heat, making the loss of air conditioning that's oftentimes associated with an outage a potential matter of life and death for many in this community. So back in 2007, a wildfire took down that transmission line that served the community, and it propelled the utility to actually apply for and win a grant to install one of the world's largest utility-owned microgrids. The city of Borrego Springs microgrid integrated various generation and storage configurations, including rooftop solar, and it enables customers to actively participate in managing their energy use. So then fast forward a little bit. Back in 2013, the microgrid's resiliency capabilities were actually put to the test when lightning and flooding knocked out that same critical transmission line. In response, the microgrid did exactly what we wanted it to do. It islanded and it directed power to critical infrastructure, including a gas station, a library that serves as a cooling center for the community for those who can't relocate, and it also provided full power for an elderly community. But that microgrid, it's not only providing a reliable source of electricity, it's also reducing the community's greenhouse gas emissions by 20%. So this is a great example of how smart grid technologies can provide cleaner, more reliable power and make our communities safer in the face of disaster. I want to highlight another smart grid example because I think it really demonstrates how better technology can actually address social and economic disparity, which it's such a critical part of what we're trying to do. Because the reality is we are not going to decarbonize our grid or achieve our ambitious climate goals if parts of this state's diverse population are left out or left behind. And we are starting behind. My agency recently conducted analysis that found that within the Southern California Edison's utility territory, more than 140 low-income census tracts had an average 2014 August electricity bill greater than $300. That's an average. So think about that. Thousands of low-income families across California are spending hundreds of dollars a month on their electricity bills alone. And these are the areas that we expect to see some of the largest increase in the numbers of hot days in the future. So unless we do something different in terms of how we build and manage our electricity system and our buildings, California's most vulnerable are only going to become more stressed from the impacts of climate change and its associated expenses. But there is a role for solar and for other technological solutions to help to provide California with clean and affordable power. So let me give you an example. With state support, a tenant-owned mobile home park in Bakersfield was recently outfitted with its own solar PV system and energy storage system. And this has reduced their rates by 42%. So while we're seeing exciting developments in these policies and technologies and markets, the reality is this is going to be an uphill battle that's going to require different thinking and new approaches. We will certainly have to accomplish this already ambitious transition against a backdrop of change and uncertainty. Economically, we've enjoyed a really strong market these past several years, and that by many indicators won't last, which will arguably impact the rate at which we can advance cutting-edge technologies. We're also changing faces in our utility structure. The advent and rapid growth of community choice aggregators is leading to a decentralization of our utility system, and this is raising questions about whether our current regulatory framework is going to be sufficient to make sure our state goals are met. And of course, the PG&E bankruptcy has created uncertainty, not only about future utility structure, but also how it will impact existing procurement contracts. So as the bankruptcy court works through these decisions, the state is working to ensure that customers continue to receive reliable, affordable, safe electricity. And by far, the most high-stakes challenge we face in modernizing our grid in a way and at a rate that can keep up with the impacts of climate change, especially wildfires. I mentioned that I had the opportunity to tour Paradise back in November. And when I did that, I was at PG&E's base camp, where about 3,000 people were working to restore electricity and energy to the city so that folks could rebuild their homes. And one of the PG&E employees said something to me that I think really sums it up. He said that our electricity grid in California was built for a climate of 50 years ago. And I couldn't have put it more simply. Part of modernizing our grid means that we now have to implement strategies that make us more resilient to wildfire. This includes improved weather forecasting, real-time data and communication, undergrounding lines, and solar. It includes more solar and more storage and other distributed technologies that can provide power locally when utilities have to de-energize more sections of the system and for longer periods of time during high wildfire risk conditions. So the impacts of wildfire and climate change impacts broadly are posing significant additional challenges to remaking our electricity system. But solar is going to be an important part of that suite of solutions. In short, we have our work cut out for us. No doubt, change and uncertainty will make the formidable task of decarbonizing our grid even more challenging. But I think it's that very change and uncertainty that is going to make this hard, that is also going to provide an opportunity. It's an opening for us to be able to do something different. And when it comes down to it, we have to be successful because so many people are counting on it. The Inland Empire and communities across California who crave economic development and need to pin their future to a cleaner economy, like Lancaster, are why we need to do this. That small town in the middle of the desert without reliable electricity, they are why we have to do this. And the low-income trailer park community with residents that struggle to pay their utility bills is why we have to do this. And the campfire. and the campfires that we know are coming is also why we have to do this. In California, decarbonizing our grid, creating a clean energy system, it's not about technological advancement and modernization for the sake of it. We are doing this to create a better life in California. So, all of you in the room, especially you students, let's get busy.